I'm Din. I'm a painter and I've been painting for around 20 years. My style is veering toward the pop art style, and a lot of my work, the colors are like very contrasting and very bright, very loud. But at the same time, my subject matter revolves around nostalgia in Singapore. Started me longing for things that I've lost in the past.
I've always painted a lot of local architecture to try and document the constant changes in our landscape. And one of the buildings I've always been curious about is Parkview Square, or the Gotham City building as we usually call it. It had seemingly appeared out of nowhere, right across the historic district of Kampong Gelam. It is an imposing and almost alien structure. And I've always wondered, what came before the Gotham building? What was this place before all this development?
I would love to find out more about the history of the place so that I can start on a new series of paintings. My most vivid memory of Parkview Square will be playing football there about 20 years ago with my mates.
Not too long ago, the whole area around the Gotham building used to be empty open fields. Now, it's completely built up. But I still clearly remember playing football here under the shadow of the Gotham building. Strangely though, I have no memory of what this place was before Parkview Square was built. Maybe it had always been an open space of sorts, where you would find seasonal markets for the residents of Kampong Gelam, and on special occasions, maybe even some happening street festivals. But wait, since we are talking about the Gotham building here, could it have been Batman's hideout all along? Yeah, right. To get to the bottom of this, I decided to meet with one of the architects of Parkview Square. Besides, I've been dying to know, why does it look like something out of a comic book?
So this building is very special, and not many buildings in Singapore could have this kind of setting.
An architect with a wealth of experience, Haipin counts Parkview Square among his most notable projects.
It was built in 2002. So the building owner is Mr. Huang Sr.
Haipin tells me that the late Mr. Huang was a visionary Taiwanese tycoon who wanted to invest in Singapore.
He wanted the building to be timeless. That means 50 years from now, the building is still as good as what it is. It won't be outdated, so to speak.
It was his magnum opus, and so he decided on a grand Art Deco theme. With its Baroque elements and bronze art sculptures, he sought to create an eternal structure that symbolized strength and security.
I'm trying to find out the history behind what existed before Parkview Square. Can you help me?
Unfortunately, I do not know what was this before. So when URA let out the land in the late 1990s, the land is already vacant. It's just a flat piece of land with turfing. I wouldn't know very much of the history or what was it before in there, but I suspect it may be some row of shop houses.
Too bad Mr. Teo didn't know the history about the area, but he did share some interesting fact about Gotham City. Right now, I just need to find someone who knows.
It's a long shot, but I called up my old football buddies to see if they have any info on the area around Parkview Square and the field we used to play on.
When did we last play over there? 2000, eh? 2000.
Around there, yeah, around there.
But you guys remember or not?
Has the field always been there, or was there something else?
Although we hang around here quite a lot, right? But it's just...
Yeah, we don't concentrate on playing soccer, we don't care what's around.
As it turns out, none of my friends can remember either. But maybe we can get a clue by looking at old maps of the city. Much to our surprise, we find small, unfamiliar streets.
And this is where we are, okay?
Right.
And then this is the field.
Okay.
We thought we knew Kampong Gelam, but in fact, just one street across where Parkview Square is, there used to be a whole other place that we had absolutely no clue about.
Jeddah Street,
Jeddah Street.
Light Street.
And there is one lone building that catches our attention.
Okay.
This green building here is very curious, eh?
What's the name of
I mean,
What's the name of the building?
I have no idea.
Oh, it looks like a mosque. It's a mosque. What mosque is
Over
that?
here, yeah. It's a mosque, is it?
Just what was this area and this mysterious mosque? Did we stumble into a lost part of Kampong Gelam? It's time to turn to an expert, perhaps an architectural historian who has written extensively about Kampong Gelam might know more.
I'm glad you asked me this because I find it an interesting area.
Finally, I think we're getting somewhere.
Can you tell me about the history of the area where Parkview Square is located?
It's actually a forgotten extension of Kampong Gelam. Let's say if you look at this map, so the Parkview Square area is actually here now. So what is this? So this is Haji Lane, Bali Lane, and then Shaikh Madrasah Lane, Clyde Street, and Jeddah Street. And at the end of Jeddah Street, coming in from the beach, is the mosque. So what we're looking at is the full extent of Kampong Gelam actually.
Using a map from 1893, Dr. Imran shows a much bigger Kampong Gelam than we know today, stretching all the way from Bras Basah to the Kallang River.
Can you tell me more about this mosque here? I can't seem to find a name to it.
So this mosque is actually Masjid Madro. It was also known as Masjid Baru, meaning new mosque, because it was the newest mosque when it was completed sometime slightly before 1870.
There are but a few photos of Masjid Madro. Dr. Imran shows me a rare photo of its original form before the Second World War and how it looked like later in the 60s. He tells me that the mosque was a prominent landmark and that the area around it was named Kampong Masjid Baru after the new mosque at the time. Dr. Imran also reveals that Masjid Madro was located exactly where Parkview Square is today, and that surprisingly, it used to be very close to the sea.
The entire waterfront of Kampong Gelam was in fact a harbour front, So the clues are there. If you look carefully at this is in fact reclamation, an early reclamation. So the original shoreline is in fact along Beach Road. Everything south of Beach Road that you are looking at here was an early reclamation project.
According to Dr. Imran, in the early to late 1800s, Kampong Gelam was once a bustling port town. It played a major role as a pilgrim hub for the Muslim community in the region on their long and arduous Hajj journey to Mecca by sea. Mosques like Masjid Madro were intimately tied to the pilgrimage trail. It was connected to the waterfront by Jeddah Street and was essential in supporting the cultural and spiritual needs of arriving pilgrims. But over the years, major reclamation works have erased much of Kampong Gelam's maritime heritage.
I intend to paint Masjid Baru. Can you tell me something interesting or special about the masjid?
Right, so I think if you ask me what's special about it, I suppose from the architectural point of view, it was quite outstanding in terms of the tiered roof.
Called the Tajuk, the mosque's pyramidal roof is the oldest known form in Southeast Asia. And this particular example was unique in how much steeper it was than usual as compared to the original Tajuk roof on Masjid Sultan before it was rebuilt into the dome form we are familiar with today.
So I mean, you can't see these forms anymore today because the most of the time the roof form is no longer produced, right? We produce the dome form. So that's what we've lost with the demolition of Masjid Madro.
It was interesting speaking to Dr. Imran. I didn't realize there was a lot of history, the place where I used to play football. And I finally found out the name of the mosque, which is Masjid Madro.
It has inspired me to start work on a new painting because it seems like so much of this precious history has been lost. And I want to try and bring some of it back. Now, I just have to figure out what does a lost kampong look like. My name is Din. I am a painter and I paint the past for future generations to remember. For my next painting, I have decided to recreate the lost kampong that used to exist where Parkview Square is, aka the Gotham Building. Kampong Masjid Baru was once a part of Kampong Gelam and home to one of the oldest mosques in Singapore. To start, I met with someone who used to go to the mosque.
Masjid Madro was demolished in 1996.
Helmi was a student of the Imam of the mosque and is deeply passionate about its history.
So Masjid Madro was built in 1870 for the Javanese community. There were already a few kiais. Kiais is a term used as a title for scholars for the Javanese. And one prominent kiai who was very fundamental in the construction of Masjid Madro was by the name of Kiai Matarov. They named the mosque after him.
So Helmi, can you tell me how was Masjid Madro special to you?
It's special, it's unique. It has its own presence. It's like you're stepping into the soul of something that transport you back to the past.
Helmi tells me that he had gone to Masjid Madro with his late father in the 80s. He remembers clearly the kolam, a huge pool of water for ablution. This was different from any other mosque he's been to where they use a tap. This was more like a swimming pool. He had heard stories of younger kids diving in and looking back. He kind of wished he had. Then as he made his way into the prayer hall, Helmi recalls his attention would always be drawn to the mimbar, a pulpit where the imam or priest would lead prayers, and the beautifully intricate wooden floral carvings on its sides.
So as a child, when you enter, like, wow, how would that be?
Yeah.
I remember my late father used to say, you see that mimbar? The time of Sheikh Suhaimi, it was like that.
Okay, so who's Sheikh Suhaimi?
For us to know Masjid Madro and its history, you really have to know the one who put Masjid Madro on the map.
Helmi explains that Sheikh Suhaimi was the second imam at Masjid Madro. He was a charismatic, if controversial, Muslim scholar who attracted thousands of followers in the 40 years that he served till his passing in 1925. People would come in droves from all over Southeast Asia just to see him. But what's most interesting is that Sheikh Suhaimi was known not only for his knowledge and teachings, but also for his apparent miraculous feats. In his biography written by his grandson, it is said that Sheikh Suhaimi could be in multiple places at the same time. He could seemingly produce gold coins from thin air, walk in the rain and not get wet.
And this was, I can say, the golden years of Masjid Madro.
Honestly, it all sounds quite surreal. It must be hard to separate the man from the legend. But Helmi claims that Sheikh Suhaimi's real legacy lies in his championing of reformist ideas, which later transformed Singapore's Islamic community through the work of his heirs.
One was that his son, Sheikh Muhammad Fadlullah Suhaimi, was the first one to conduct Friday sermons at Masjid Madro in Malay language.
Helmi explains that before this, Friday sermons in Singapore were always conducted in Arabic, a language most local Muslims didn't understand. Through the Suhaimi family, Masjid Madro made Friday sermons more accessible to the masses, and even more so later on, when it started conducting sermons in English.
You just imagine during the 80s, you want to go for Friday prayers and you step into this like authentic Javanese-looking mosque, and it was delivered in English. So our Indian brothers can also understand. Back then, it was for the Javanese community, but as it gets more cosmopolitan, they expand it for the benefit of the Muslim community.
I didn't expect all the things that I was supposed to hear today, because initially I thought it was just about the place, but it was tied to a person, and then it was so much history, and it was very enlightening.
While Masjid Madro was a significant landmark, it was but only one part of the kampong. To get the full picture for my painting, I head to the National Library to find out what the rest of the kampong was like and the people who lived there. I find this article from January 1986 when it was first announced that Kampong Masjid Baru was gazetted for redevelopment.
The reporters interviewed a few people who were going to be displaced, one being a Bugis trader who had stayed there for about 30 years, and then there was also a tailor who was there after the Second World War.
There was also a Chinese cobbler and an Indian barber. It seems to me that Kampong Masjid Baru was a vibrant and self-sufficient community where all types of people live and work for many decades.
I feel a bit sad knowing that they had to be displaced because of the situation. Leaving behind everything that they had known and then trying to adapt to a new place.
I can't turn back time, but I can try to get a sense of the past by speaking to someone who was there back in the day.
Yeah, it really was nothing like that before.
Alan is an ex-resident who grew up on Clyde Street at the heart of Kampong Masjid Baru in the late 1950s. So, what do you remember about this place when you were growing up?
Well, a lot of old structures which I can only get from photos.
Ellen tells me that the place she lived in was pretty messy back then.
This was where the shop houses. We live on top. Some of the shop houses have got shops below. So it will be provision shops, or they will be shops that sell sundry items like predominantly porcelain ware.
Surprisingly, Ellen tells me that her neighbours were actually mainly Chinese in the 1960s. I had always thought that Kampong Gelam was predominantly Malay.
Actually, we do have some Indians as well, very few. But because the Chinese were in the majority, the Indians had learned how to speak Chinese dialects. And the place where I lived was predominantly Teochews. So you can find Indians speaking Teochew to us, which is quite interesting.
What do you miss the most about this place?
Actually, I miss the boisterousness of the whole place, the noisiness. I also miss the street wayangs actually, because that was something which I had grown up with, because Grandma loved at that time to watch wayang, so will bring us along. That's the wayang stages. You see, they are very crude.
Ellen says that these street wayangs only came about twice a year during the Hungry Ghost Festival. She remembers the whole neighbourhood getting all excited for the festivities and staying up late to watch the free performances. She was especially fascinated by the colourful costumes and liked to peep at the back of the tent to see the actors getting ready. It was some of her happiest childhood memories.
Unfortunately, familiar sights are gone. But when I come across photographs of the days gone by, it brings back a sense of happiness, actually, because I could remember the place as it was.
After speaking to Ellen, I've learned that the place was actually quite vibrant and colourful. At the same time, I was also sad that it doesn't exist anymore.
I mean, this place is literally one street away from Kampong Gelam. Why was it not conserved? Did it somehow slip through the cracks? My name is Din. I'm a painter, and my work often deals with documenting the past for future generations to remember. I've been looking into the history of Kampong Masjid Madro, where the current Parkview Square occupies. Before it was redeveloped in the 90s, there was a mosque and a vibrant community that lived in the shophouses around the area. But today, not a single trace of it remains. I'm hoping to create a painting that can serve as a reminder of this area's once colourful past.
Living in Singapore, change is inevitable, especially physical landscape. I've been always portraying that through my paintings. When I get to experience through this journey, it makes me curious even more, like why certain spaces like Masjid Madro and the area around it couldn't be conserved, because beside it there's Kampong Gelam, which is a conservation area. It makes me even more curious to find out why.
And to do just that, I head down to the URA in search of answers. And there I hope some form of closure.
So in the 1980s, URA embarked on new focus, which is actually to have urban renewal within the city centre.
Lei Hua is the urban planner who oversees the central area south where Parkview Square is.
I think at that time there's a lot of pressure to develop, especially in the city centre. It's prime land, so there is a lot of pressure to actually have bigger buildings, more buildings, and to grow the city. And at the same time, you know, when you looked at the conservation buildings, they're not in the state that they are in today, where it's very pretty and all that. So they were quite dilapidated. And I don't think at that time people did see a lot of value in the buildings, maybe, you know, both in the owners and all that. So what we really did need to do was to take a very careful look to see how important they are to our whole, the Singapore story, basically, and how we can balance this rapid development with saving these buildings.
Lei Hua tells me that in the 80s, URA embarked on the ambitious urban renewal program, which led to the development of the 1986 Central Area Structure Plan. The plan divided the city centre into areas of high-rise, high-intensity development, green spaces and conservation districts.
So for example, the Ophir Rochor corridor, which is where Parkview and Duo developments now stands, that area was identified as an area for high-density development. And we intended for it to have offices, retail, residential and hotel uses, but at the same time, it was not development at all costs. So adjacent to this Ophir Rochor area, we had the Kampong Gelam area. So it's this little balance that we say, okay, growth here, there, conservation, Kampong Gelam, Little India, Chinatown. That's how the structure plan in 1986 set up the planning direction for us so that we can actually move ahead.
When you're trying to conserve, do you take sentiments into consideration as well?
Well, in the past, conservation was really quite thought-driven. But after that, we started to look more outside of these historical areas in the city centre and look beyond into areas which people are more familiar with, like near their homes and all that. So in 2003, we had an identity plan which involved quite a massive public engagement. We identified, together with the community, many old world charms, places like Balestier, Jalan Besar, Tanjung Katong and Juchet, and also gazetted them for conservation. And also take into consideration people's views and people's sense of place, what's important to them, what they endear themselves to, because we're not always right, so we do need to hear from everybody else.
That's true. After speaking to Lei Hua in the 80s, there was a lot of pressure for redevelopment. But right now, things are so different. And if Masjid Madro and Kampung Masjid Baru was still around, I feel that there would be a greater chance for it to be conserved. It was just bad timing.
There's no way to bring back the past, but I can remember it, honor it in my own small way.
So I painted a street view of the masjid, and then outside there were a row of shop houses. And I used a lot of colors because after I spoke to Ellen, I realized that the place was actually very colorful. And this place has a lot of history. And it's not just any kind of history. The mosque itself, Masjid Madro, has history of more than 100 over years old, and community around it was the Chinese community where they even had wayang. And all this are soul of the country. I mean, Singaporeans should know we are growing as a city, but at the same time, we don't want to forget who we were before. And places like this tell a lot about who we were or who we are. And I hope through my artworks, although in a small part, I get to celebrate what this place was before.